Hello? Pull up a chair. My name is Earl McKenna, and the sea has given me more stories than fish in my 50 years out here. Some days you catch the quota, and some days the ocean catches you off guard, showing you things that don't belong in a biology textbook. Before we spin this yarn, and it's a strange one, if you appreciate a good prose that smells of salt and diesel, do an old captain a favor. Click that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any adventures. We've got a long drift ahead of us. I've always said that electronics are a fisherman's best friend and his worst liar. You stare at those screens long enough, watching the jagged lines of the sonar, the reds and yellows of the heat map, and you start to see things that aren't there. It's like staring at clouds. Eventually, your brain wants to make a shape out of the noise. But what happened to me last July, 40 miles off the coast where the continental shelf drops off into the abyss, wasn't a trick of the mind. It was a trick of the deep. I was skippering the Rusty Gull, a 38-foot trawler that's seen better decades, let alone days. She's a sturdy girl, built of fiberglass and stubbornness, much like myself. The weather was peculiar, that flat, oily calm that makes the Atlantic look like a sheet of hammered lead. No wind to speak of, just a heavy, humid stillness that stuck your shirt to your back. It was the kind of day where the sound travels too far, where you can hear a porpoise blow air a mile away. I was solo that day. My usual deckhand, a young kid named Danny, had called in sick with stomach bug or maybe a heartache. I didn't ask. I enjoy the solitude sometimes. It gives a man room to think, or better yet, room not to think. I was targeting swordfish, drifting deep baits over the canyons where the depth drops from 800 feet to 2,000 in the blink of an eye. A lonely place to... You're out of sight of land, suspended over a world of absolute. I had the autopilot set to a slow drift, just enough to keep the lines taut. I poured myself a cup of coffee, black, thick as mud, and settled into the helm chair to watch the sounder, my fish finder with the line for Uno. I spent more on that screen than I did on my truck. Doesn't lie. It shows you the thermoclines, the bait balls, the individual arcs of predators hunting in the deep. For 3 hours, it showed exactly what I expected. A whole lot of nothing, followed by the jagged bottom line scrolling past 1,800. Then the alarm chirped. I glanced at the screen expecting a school of squid or maybe a passing submarine. What I saw made me spill hot coffee on my knuckle. The bottom reading, which had been steady at 1,800 feet, had suddenly jumped. It read 50 feet. I tapped the glass. Come on now, I muttered. Don't you go fritzing on me. I checked the gain setting. Sometimes a dense layer of plankton or a sudden temperature change can trick the transducer into thinking the bottom is shallower, and it is. We call it a phantom bottom, but the return signal was strong, solid red. That means hard mass, rock, or something dense. I looked over the side of the boat. The water was that deep, indigo blue that signals the abyss. You can't see 50 feet down in this water, but you can feel the depth. It feels heavy. I looked back at the screen. 45 feet. It was rising. Panic, cold and sharp, pricked the back of my neck. If I was drifting over a sea mount or an uncharted pinnacle, I was in danger of grounding. But I knew these charts. I knew them better than the lines on my own palms. There was no mountain here. The nearest structure was 10 miles west. I threw the engine into neutral, killing the forward momentum. I ran to the back deck and peered into the water, shielding my eyes from the glare. Nothing but blue. I went back to the helm. 40 feet. Impossible, I said aloud, my voice sounding thin in the empty air. I checked the GPS coordinates. I was exactly where I was supposed to be, floating over the canyon. There is no land here. There is no reef. There is no shipwreck large enough to register as a false bottom rising 500 yards towards the surface. I rebooted the system. Maybe it was a software glitch. The screen went black, then flickered back to life with the brand logo, then the loading bar. It felt like eternity. When the sonar pinged again, I held my 35 feet. It wasn't a glitch, and it wasn't just rising. It was approaching. Strange sensation washed over me, primal. It wasn't just fear of running aground anymore. It was the feeling of being watched. You know that feeling you get in the woods when a predator is tracking you? The hair on your arm stands up, and the silence suddenly feels heavy? That's what I felt, but I was surrounded by miles of open ocean. I grabbed the throttle, intending to power away to get off this mysterious shallow patch, but my hand hesitated. The fisherman, a curious fool that lives in my gut, wanted to know. I looked at the scrolling history on the screen. The rise was smooth, almost organic. A rock pinnacle has jagged edges. A wreck has sharp angles. This was a curve, a massive, gentle slope that had come up from the deep to meet me. Then I heard it. It wasn't a sound you hear with your ears, not at first. It was a vibration. The coffee cup on the dashboard started to dance, rattling against the compass. The deck plates beneath my boots began to hum. It was a low-frequency thrum, like a massive diesel idling to water, or the purr of a cat the size of a cathedral. The water around the Rusty Gull began to change. The smooth, oily surface started to tremble. Tiny ripples radiated out from the hull, not caused by the boat, but by pushing the water up from below. I looked at the sounder one last 10 feet, and then the screen went pure red. The return was so strong it maxed out the receiver. Lord have mercy, I ran to the gunnel and looked down, and there, rising out of the indigo gloom, I saw it. It wasn't rock, it wasn't coral. It was a texture I had never seen. Dark, mottled gray, covered in patches of what looked like ancient withered kelp and clusters of barnacles the size of trash can lids. It broke the surface 20 yards off my starboard beam. The water cascaded off it like a waterfall, roaring as it displaced the ocean. The smell hit me instantly. Not the smell of fresh fish, but a stench of decay, of musk, of things that have been buried in the dark for 1,000 years. It smelled like the breath of the earth. My fish finder had said the bottom was 50 feet. Was wrong. The bottom hadn't risen. Something had decided to come up for air. The sheer scale of it broke my brain for a moment. Have you ever stood next to a skyscraper and looked straight up, feeling that vertigo of insignificance? That's how I felt, and I was looking down and across. The mass continued to rise, shedding millions of gallons of seawater. It wasn't a submarine. There was no metal, no symmetry of man. It was organic. It was alive. The Rusty Gull, my loyal 38-footer, rocked violently in the displacement waves, tossing me against the cabin wall. I scrambled to my feet, gripping the rail, eyes wide, heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. It kept coming. A ridge of dark, leathery skins, and pitted by battles with things I couldn't imagine, rose higher than the mass. It stretched, looked like a football field, and that was just broken. The water around it churned white, foaming with the release of gas and pressure. I realized with a jolt of terror that I was drifting right towards it. The displacement was pulling me in, a vacuum created by the surfacing Leviathan. "Start, damn you!" I yelled, slamming the throttle into reverse. The prop bit into the water, churning whitewash, fighting the pull. The engine roared, straining, and slowly, agonizingly, the Rusty Gull backed away. I put 50 yards between us, then 100. Then I killed the gear and just watched. The thing lay there, basking in the sunlight. It looked like a newly formed volcanic island, dark and foreboding. Steam rose from its back, if it was a back. The vibration I'd felt earlier changed into a sound. A deep, resonant groan echoed through the hull of my boat and into the air. It sounded like a cello played by a giant, mournful and loud enough to rattle my teeth. I grabbed my binoculars, my hands shaking so bad I could barely focus. Through the lenses, the details were horrifying and mesmerizing. I saw parasites crawling on its skin, crab-like things with pale, translucent shells scuttling over the ridges of its hide. They were the size of spaniels. I saw scars that looked like trenches, healed over with white fibrous tissue. What was it? A whale? No blue whale ever grew to this size. This was something archaic, a remnant, a creature that the history books forgot, or maybe one they were too afraid to write about. Hey, before I tell you what happened next, because it gets hairier than a tangled fishing line, I'd love to know where you folks are weathering the storm from. Are you landlocked in the Midwest, dreaming of the coast, or sitting on a porch in the Keys? Drop your location in the comments and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It helps the channel more than you know. Back to the monster. As I watched, a fissure opened on the side of the map. At first, I thought it was a wound opening up. Then I realized it was an eye. It was enormous, the size of a tractor tire. It didn't have a pupil like a cat or a human. It was a horizontal slit, glowing with a milky bioluminescent green. It rolled in its socket, looking up at the sun, squinting against the sudden brightness. Then it rolled down. It looked at the boat. I froze. I have stared down sharks, bears, and angry port authorities, but I have never felt a gaze like that. It was intelligent, cold, ancient, and utterly indifferent. It didn't look at me with malice. It looked at me the way you or I might look at a gnat hovering over our coffee cup. I was nothing. I was a speck of dust on the surface of its world. The fear that gripped me wasn't the panic of immediate death. It was a deep, existential dread. It was the realization that we humans, our cities and our internet and our arrogance, we don't own this planet. We just rent the drop. The creature shifted. A massive flipper, or perhaps a wing, I couldn't tell, slapped the water on the far side, sending a spray of water 300 feet into the air. The sound was like a cannon shot. The island began to rotate. It was turning. I realized I was in the way, spun the wheel, jamming the throttle forward this time. The Rusty Gull leapt, her bow rising as she dug in. I didn't care about the fuel economy. I pushed that diesel engine to the red line. Behind me, the water erupted. A tail, fluked and jagged like a mountain range, rose out of the water. It must have been 200 feet wide. It hung there for a second, a monolith against the blue sky, blocking the sun. Shadow fell over my boat. I braced for the impact, for the wave that would surely capsize me. I gripped the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Like this, I whispered. Not today. The tail crashed down. The impact didn't hit me like a wave. It hit me like an earthquake. The shock wave traveled through the water and slammed into the hull of the Rusty Gull. The boat didn't just rock. It was lifted, tossed sideways like a toy in a bathtub. I was thrown from the helm chair, sliding across the cabin floor, crashing into the tackle station. Rods tumbled down on top of me, hooks snagging my shirt. The coffee pot shattered. I scrambled up, ignoring the bruises, expecting to see water pouring in, expecting the boat to be in splinters. She was upright, barely. The ocean around me was a mess of white foam and confused chop, boiling as if a fire burned beneath it. I looked back. The creature was diving. It didn't splash and thrash like a breaching whale. It slid. It had checked the surface, taken a breath, or whatever it did, and now it was returning to the dark. The massive back slipped under the water with terrifying speed. The suction was immense. A whirlpool began to form, a swirling vortex of green and white water where the creature had been. It was pulling water in with such force that the Rusty Gull, even at full throttle, felt sluggish, dragging backward. I fought the wheel, keeping the bow pointed away from the swirl. The engine screamed, black smoke pouring from the exhaust. Inch by inch, we clawed our way out of the gravity well of the sinking Leviathan, and then it was gone. The ocean didn't go calm immediately. It took 20 minutes for the waves to settle down, for the foam to dissipate. The presence, heavy electric feeling in the air, vanished Instantly, I cut the throttle to idle. The silence that followed, the loudest thing I have ever heard. No birds, no wind, just the rhythmic chug, chug, chug of my engine and the sound of my own ragged breathing. I checked the fish finder. The screen showed a chaotic mess of noise, turbulence from the dive, but through the noise I saw the bottom line. It was plummeting. 500 feet, 1,000 feet, 1,800. It settled back to the flat line of the canyon floor. The anomaly was gone. I didn't fish anymore that day. I didn't have the heart for it. How could I drop a hook into the water knowing that was down there? It felt disrespectful. It felt suicidal. I turned the boat west and headed for home. It was a 4-hour steam back to the marina. I spent the whole time scanning the horizon, jumping at every shadow, every whitecap. When I finally tied up at the dock, the sun was setting, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges. Old man Miller was on the dock, hosing down his charter boat. He looked at me, saw my face, pale, eyes wide, hands still trembling slightly. "Rough day, Earl?" he asked, spitting tobacco into the water. "Catch anything?" I looked at him. I looked at the solid wood of the dock, the concrete of the seawall, the safety of the land. I wanted to tell him. I wanted to scream that there are monsters under our keel, that the ocean, sleeping giant, poke with sticks. "No," I said, my voice raspy. "Just a lot of empty water today, Mill. Just empty water." He nodded, losing interest. "That's fishing," he said. I walked to my truck, leaving my gear on the boat. I didn't clean the salt off the windows. I just wanted to be home on dry land with a locked door between me and the sea. I still fish. It's what I do. It's who I am. But I don't go to the canyons alone anymore, and I never, ever trust the depth sounder when it tells me the bottom is rising, because sometimes the bottom isn't rising. Sometimes the bottom is waking up. They say the ocean is 95% unexplored. We like to think that means there are just more rocks and small fish down there to find. But after that Tuesday, I know the truth. The unknown isn't empty. It's waiting. We walk through this world with the arrogance of mass, believing we have mapped and tamed every corner of our planet. But nature, especially the vast and crushing depths of the ocean, holds ancient secrets that are indifferent or existent. True wisdom lies in respecting the unknown and understanding that some boundaries exist for a reason. We are guests here, not owners, and there are sleeping giants we should be careful not to wake. If this story sent a shiver down your spine, or if you've ever seen something on the water you couldn't explain, hit that subscribe button and leave a comment below. Join the crew, and let's keep the legends alive. Safe sailing to you all.